So in July 1975, I took a flight to LA to visit my grandparents. After a few days, I headed to Singapore, stopping briefly in Hawaii and Guam. Singapore is an island nation at the southern tip of the Malaysian peninsula and serves as a major port and transportation and trading hub due to its location between the Indian and Pacific Oceans. It gained independence in 1965 after it was kicked out of the Malaysian Federation and was ruled by Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew with an iron fist. Spitting and chewing gum were forbidden. God help you if you got caught with drugs. The city was a mixture of old and new, with the old neighborhoods in Kampong steadily giving way to high-rises. The population was about 2/3 Chinese, 1/3 Malay, and a smattering of Indians, Pakistanis, and Westerners. The Chinese held the government positions and ran most of the businesses, and the Malays held most of the service jobs. In the evening, Singapore kind of transformed itself. Certain streets and car parks were closed to traffic, and hundreds of food stalls and outdoor shops appeared out of nowhere. For $1, you could get a bowl of fried noodles, a side of satay chicken, and an Anchor beer. It was fantastic. And when everything else closed, it was Boogie Street, where the most beautiful women you've ever seen strutted up and down between the tables. Except it turns out they weren't women. Steve's boat, the Hai Lung, a 38-foot steel-plated sloop, was kept at the Singapore Yacht Club on the north side of the island. We stayed on the boat and took turns staying with Steve's parents, who were very gracious. The days were spent repairing and fitting out the boat and shopping in the markets for supplies, cooking gear, canned food, medical supplies, camping gear, safety equipment. There wasn't much room down below, so we built a structure on the transom to hold all the stuff. After about 3 weeks, we were ready to go. The plan was to head north about 100 miles to a small group of islands off the east coast of Malaysia and spend a few weeks as a kind of a test run before heading south into Indonesia. Steve's father took us all out for one last dinner on Cook Street. The next morning we set sail. The Hai Lung was a heavy boat for her size and a little underpowered, so she could only do about 4 to 5 knots in a decent breeze. So the trip would take about 2 days. Just outside Singapore, we cleared immigration in Malaysia and saw the prominent notices about the kind of people they didn't want in their country. They didn't like hippies, so we were on notice. Steve had warned us about pirates, and we didn't believe him, but sure enough, on day 2, we were about 10 miles off the coast, under sail, and saw a small skiff making a beeline for us from the shore. In Singapore, we had each bought a machete, so we all came up on deck carrying these machetes and tried not to make eye contact with them while they circled our boat. After a few minutes, I guess they didn't think it was worth the trouble, and they headed back toward the mainland. Later that afternoon, we arrived at Pulau Tinggi, the southernmost island of the group, and dropped anchor between a small islet and a beautiful stretch of beach on the south coast, where a small kampong is located. We did some diving on the reef, cooked a meal, and passed out. The next morning, we woke up to spectacular views. The 2,000-foot volcanic peak, which gives the island its name, hovered above this layer of mist that extended through the valleys. It was stunning. Steve and Mark took the raft to check out the kampong. A few hours later, they returned with a couple of locals who wanted to see the boat. Steve said he had met with the Pangulu, the village chief, and told him our story. He said we could stay as long as we wanted and gave us a stretch of beach about a half mile from the village where we could set camp, and he said they would teach us where to fish, how to find fresh water, and where to pick fruit. He even invited us to dinner at his home that night. This was too good to be true. The kampong was made up of small huts, a school, a general store, and a medical hut. There was no electricity or running water. Nearby were a few small farms with vegetables, chickens, goats, but mainly it was a fishing community. The men would fish and work on their sails and play soccer every day at 4 o'clock on a field in the middle of the village. The women took care of the homes, gathered vegetables and fruit, and prepared the meals. The kids attended school and, well, were just kids. No one spoke English except the school teacher. Over the next few days, we got to know some of the locals by name. The younger ones would hang out at the campsite, visit the boat, play guitars with us, and help us to learn Malay. They mostly wanted to know, what was life like in America? We spent the days spearfishing, reading, and hiking around the island. We even did a couple of night dives on the reef with underwater flashlights and managed to catch a couple of manta rays and squid. Sometimes we were invited into their homes for meals. The men would sit on the floor and eat and talk. The women would pass in dishes of rice, fish, curry, and chicken from the other room. There were no utensils. We learned to eat using only, and I mean only, our right hand. We were also politely asked to shave our beards because the younger kids were getting spooked, and some of the older folks thought we were communists. One day, the locals challenged us to a soccer game, and the whole village turned out. It was kind of like Malaysia versus U.S. in the World Cup, except they showed up with their A-team, all wearing cleats. I mean, there could have been 100 of us, and we still would have gotten beaten. The next day, we challenged them to a game of frisbee, and we turned the tables on them. I began to admire their way of life, the way they handled themselves, and the way they moved without any wasted effort, and the way they talked to each other. I don't think I ever heard one raised voice or one argument the whole time I was there.
Across the sand to find this peace among your people in the sun, where the families work the land as they have always done. Oh, it's so far the other way, my country's gone. Across my home has grown the shadow.
Scattered around offshore were these fish houses called kilungs, built on wooden stakes. We motored up to one of them and asked if 2 of us could stay with them for a few days, taking some photographs and helping them fish. Boleh, can do, was the answer. I grabbed my camera and hopped off with Steve. The kilung was run by a Chinese Malay who had 3 Malaysians working for him, and was centered around a 40-foot by 40-foot net that was lowered into the water with a system of spindles and blocks. Most of the fishing was done at night, using a strong kerosene lamp to attract fish and squid, and the net was lowered and raised about every 2 hours. During the day, they would cut bait, sort and ice the fish, and do some handline fishing. The Malaysians did most of the grunt work, and the Chinese guy cooked meals, kept up the books, and generally supervised. Locals would occasionally visit to buy fish and bring out water, vegetables, and other supplies. It's funny, I never saw any money change hands. It seems all the transactions were in some kind of bartering or credit system. Every few days, the Keelung also served as some kind of transportation hub where locals would come out to meet a fishing vessel that would ferry them to Mersing, a nearby town located on the mainland. The Keelung guys would use the boat to bring fish to the market and return with supplies and newspapers. While Steve and I were on the Keelung, the other guys decided to take the boat and go check out Pulau Pemengil. While they were there, they were lucky enough to participate in some of the Hari Raya festival.
And so, become yourself, because the past is just a goodbye. Teach your children well, their father's help did slowly go by.
Meanwhile, back on the Keelung, we were starting to fit in. We helped out with some of the work. We got some great tips on handline fishing, and we got to enjoy some really good meals. After a few days, Steve and I thanked them. They posed for a photo, and we got off. A few days later, 2 of the guys showed up at our campsite. They brought some fish, squid, bait fish, and ice, all as a gift. I mean, who does that? A few days later, we decided to move on and see some other islands. The Pangulu invited us to a big dinner at his home, attended by about 20 people. We said our goodbyes and headed out. There were 3 small islands to the northwest: Babi Kecil, Babi Besar, and Pulau Rau. And we had heard that there was a hotel on one of them. It was here that things started to get difficult. We were getting low on food and kerosene. The gas stove wasn't working, the alternator wasn't charging the batteries, which meant we had no power or lights. It also meant every time we wanted to start the engine, we had to pull the floorboards and use a hand crank. We all had coral cuts on our feet and legs that just wouldn't heal, and my left foot was starting to get infected. And the weather started to turn, with heavy squalls at least once a day, which caused repeated problems holding our anchor. Everything was wet, nothing would dry. We anchored off Pulau Rau, where the hotel was, and paddled in for a meal at the restaurant. And we met this Aussie guy who invited us over to his boat for drinks. A lot of drinks. Mel had stayed on the boat, which was a good thing. At about midnight, a storm came up, and the high lung started dragging toward the rocks. We paddled frantically in 40-knot winds trying to reach the boat, and Mel ran around trying to start the engine. If it wasn't so scary, it would have been comical. We got the engine started just before hitting the rocks and said, "That's it, let's head to one of the other islands." At Babi Kecil, we put out 2 anchors, and Mel and I went ashore to set up camp on a hillside near the beach. The next morning, we both woke up with high fevers. Apparently, we hadn't boiled the water we drank from the spring the day before. We broke camp and stumbled down to the beach. I spent the next day in my bunk, and that night another storm rolled in, and this time it was bad. During the night, we lost both anchors and had to motor around until daylight when the weather finally let up. We tried to find the anchors, but no luck. That was it. We had to go into U.S.M.A to resupply and gather our wits.
I'm getting tired of this.
U.S.M.A is a busy fishing port located about 1/2 mile upriver from the channel entrance, which weaves through a shallow bar. We had about 1 foot clearance at high tide and had to follow a fishing boat to show us the way in. We got stuck a few times and had to get towed off, but we finally made it in. The river runs a continuous 5 knots, and we were lucky enough to tie up alongside of Grand Banks, right near the town center. We went into town, and John bought us a great dinner. That's when he told us that he was leaving the boat. He wanted to spend some time trekking in Sumatra and then get a job in Singapore so he could make his way back to the States. We tried to talk him out of it, but no luck. He left the next day. I learned years later that he had died suddenly while serving as first engineer on a ship carrying ammunition to the Persian Gulf during the First Gulf War. He was 36 years old and left behind a 6-year-old daughter. It was a real shame. He was a great guy. U.S.M.A is a small, busy town made up of shops, fish markets, and eating places. The young kids kept calling us Johnny, and the teenagers flashed us the peace sign. The river was full of action, with fishing boats coming and going, river launches, lots of shouting, and of course the regular calls to prayer from the high tower on the riverbank. At night we'd sit in the cockpit, smoke these Thai sticks, and munch on mooncakes, and just take in the river scene. Over the next few days, we resupplied the boat, did some repairs, and installed 2 new anchors. But we couldn't repair the alternator, so our batteries stayed dead. Steve decided to head back to Singapore for a few days to update his visa and get our mail. Mel, Mark, and I took the boat to Pulau Tioman, the largest and furthest north of the island group. There we borrowed scuba gear from the hotel staff and spent a few days diving the reefs. Back in U.S.M.A, we tried to make ourselves presentable and hopped on a bus for a 2-hour trip to Johor Bahru, where we would get our visas renewed. I guess we weren't deemed hippies, and they gave us another 30 days. Back on the boat, we met Steve and went through our mail. It was a great feeling, connecting again with home. All was good, but they had no idea where I was or when I'd be coming home. It was now September 25th, and we decided to go live on Tioman for a couple of weeks, this time the far side of the island, where there's no hotel and only one campong. That night, we anchored inside a horseshoe-shaped bay on the east side of the island, about 100 feet off the beach. In the morning, we saw how beautiful it was. We met the Pangulu, and he said we could camp wherever we wanted. We set up camp, explored the area, and got to know some of the locals. They were just as friendly as Tingy, but different. They kind of left us alone, and didn't seem to be that interested in watching our every move. It was kind of a relief.
Oh, that's much too old a story to believe. And you know that it's taken its share of me. Even though you take such good care of me. Now you say Morocco, and that makes me smile. I haven't seen.
We got pretty good at spearfishing at night and handline fishing during the day. We even bought a fish trap from one of the fishermen, baited it, and dropped it in about 40 feet of water near the boat. We actually caught some fish that way. At one point, Mel and I decided to hike over the mountain to the other side of the island where the hotel was. It took us all day, but it was worth it. The hotel was nothing more than a 2-floor structure with a kitchen and a few rooms. But we were able to get a cold ice cream float. It was unbelievable. After a good night's sleep, we headed back. We spent 2 weeks on the island, and it was a good 2 weeks. Caught up on our reading, wrote a couple of letters, did some day sailing with some of the locals, and got pretty good at speaking Malay.
To my love, took it down. I climbed a mountain and I turned around. And I saw my
On October 10, we decided to leave and head to Pulau Aur, a small island to the south, before heading back to Singapore. That's when things changed. If you've ever hit rocks on a sailboat in the middle of the night, you'll know it's one of the scariest feelings in the world. Well, that's what happened. It was around midnight, and it was a beautiful night with a full moon, and we were sailing downwind at about 15 knots of breeze. The pilot book described a prominent rock above the surface about a half mile off the northeast tip of Pulau Aur, with a rocky ledge between the island and the rock. We were dead reckoning and thought we were well positioned, but we couldn't see the rock off the starboard side when we looked, toward the island. I turned and looked out over the port side, and my heart stopped. There was a large black silhouette about 100 yards off the port beam. I shouted, "We're inside," but too late. When we hit the first time, it knocked us off our feet. The boat pivoted and stopped. The swells picked us up and then dropped us on the rocks over and over. Each time we hit, you could feel it in your teeth. We managed to drop the sails fast and crank start the engine. Eventually, somehow, we backed the boat out to deep water. But the damage had been done. A dented keel, bent prop, damaged rudder, but no hull breach. Thank God for the steel hull. We would have been gone. At daybreak, we had our talk. The boat had to be hauled in Singapore. We were running out of money. We all had physical ailments of one kind or another. My foot was infected and swollen so bad I couldn't walk anymore. So that was it. We called off the trip. Indonesia would have to wait.
I've been warped by the rain, driven by the snow. I'm drunk and dirty, don't you know? And I'm still.
We docked the boat back in Singapore and cleaned it up. We apologized profusely to Steve's father.
Late at night,
I got some crutches and went off to see a doctor, and that was that. We heard about an American company called Western Geophysical that ran a fleet of seismic ships out of Singapore that was looking for U.S. licensed captains and engineers to operate their vessels. We dressed up with our licenses in our back pockets and went in for an interview. They hired us on the spot and told us we'd be leaving for New Guinea the next day. Today, looking back on that sailing trip, yes, we were inexperienced and naive, and it was hard. I mean, it was really hard at times. But to get to the other side of the world and see how other people lived, it made me appreciate my own country, my friends and family, my own life that much more. It was great, and I'll never regret it. As it turns out, I would stay out there as captain with Western Geophysical for another year and a half. So in a way, the adventure was just starting.
Goodbye, Mama, and goodbye to you too, Pa. Little sister, you'll have to wait a while to come along. Goodbye to this house and all its memories. We just got too old to say we're wrong. Got to make one last trip to my bedroom. I guess I'll have to leave some stuff behind. It's funny how the same old crooked pictures just don't seem the same to me tonight. There ain't no use in shedding no more tears, Mom. There ain't no use in shouting at me, Pa. I can't live no longer with your fears, Mom. I love you, but that hasn't helped at all. Each of us must do the things that matter. All of us must see what we can see. Though it was long ago, you must remember. You were once as young and scared as me. I don't know how hard it is yet, Mama, when you realize you're growing old. I know how hard it is now to be younger. I know you've tried to keep me from the cold. And thanks for all you've done. It may sound hollow. Thank you for the good times that we've known. But I must find my own road now to follow. You will all be welcome in my home. I've got my suitcase, I must go now. I don't mind about the things you said. I'm sorry, Mom, I don't know where I'm going. Remember, little sister, look ahead. Tomorrow I'll be in some other sunrise.